Hello, my name is Barbara Woster, and I am the author of Edge of Insanity, written as B.J. Woster. I'm going to be reading a chapter of this for you today. Edge of Insanity, Chapter 1, September 1924. "Let me go, please let me go," Maria implored through the thick mahogany paneling. Her voice was getting hoarse and weak, but she refused to quiet, even though pleading the better part of 9 hours had done little to change her circumstances. Her situation seemed as dire as her voice was raspy. She twisted the doorknob for the 100th time. Locked. Why she continually assumed, hour after hour, that it would suddenly be unlocked, she could only attribute to the glimmer of hope still firing in the far reaches of her brain. Another part of her brain, less hopeful and full of gloom, taunted that this door would remain locked until her captors came for her, or until she died from her forced isolation. For it to open before then would take a miracle, which seemed in short supply. She pressed an ear to the wood, cooled by the wind blowing through her open window. It was a cold wind for a summer night, and she shivered, tugging her woolen blanket more snugly about her shoulders. She sniffled and laid her head against the cool paneling. "Please, won't someone help me?" The whispered entreaty would tug at the hardest of hearts, had anyone with a heart been listening. But there was no one listening but her captors, whose voices, faint and uncomprehending, registered through the thick mahogany paneling. She wasn't confident they heard her at all, because they seemed oblivious to her appeals, or if they did hear, they chose to conveniently ignore her entreaties, confirming in her mind that they were heartless. Since she heard their muted whispering, she knew someone was there. Hearing them should have raised that glimmer of hope in her heart, reassured her that she was not alone. Yet she could have been buried beneath the earth for all the comfort those whispers provided. She shivered and reached for the doorknob again, stopping midway, a sob of frustration escaping as her hand fell to her side. A momentary surge of anger shot through her, and she lifted her hand, banging against the paneling, but could not find the strength of voice to rail at those standing on the other side. Tears trailed down her cheeks, and she stopped her attempts to gain attention, her mind reminding her of the futility of her actions. She sniffled again, and then pressed an ear against the door, straining to hear the hushed discussion, and yet afraid of what that exchange would reveal. The whispered tones scared her. She was scared now more than last night, when horrible events resulted in her imprisoned state, an inmate in her own bedroom, held under lock and key by her own father. She was scared now more than she was when she was 9, and the boogeyman came to her in the dead of night and stole her innocence. More scared because escape was out of reach and her fate was unknown. She glanced at the open window. Her bedroom was on the 5th floor, yet freedom beckoned through that portal, and she longed to answer the silent invitation, as if compelled by an unseen force, promising the escape that seemed unattainable. She leaned against the door and slid to stand upon shaky legs. She closed her eyes as she felt the blood flow back into legs unused for the past 9 hours, bent beneath her as in continual prayer, then quickly sank to the ground again as the tingling in the extremities shot painfully from her ankle to her hip, wincing as the pain intensified, then sighing as it slowly began to subside. When she was confident she could move again, she stood and shuffled closer to the window and breathed in the heady scent of liberation, tears of sorrow escaping from her eyes. Insanely, she envied those tears, for though the journey was short-lived, those droplets were free to leave their confines and slip away. Her reason and sanity returned when she gazed down at the greenery far below. If she heeded the silent call and leapt, her fate would be undecided no more. She would be dead. Still, She had to decide whether death would be such a terrible end. Somehow, it seemed a better alternative to what awaited her at the hands of her own family. The voices outside her door rose ever so slightly, drawing her away from the window and back toward the door. She stumbled over a brown and gray bunny, a gift from her father when she was 8, an appeasement for the innocence he stole from her. She picked it up and squeezed it tight, tears of fear and anguish nearly overwhelming her. How could a man who told her he loved her every single day for 18 years of living suddenly turn so brutally against her? Had not he also been just as loving with her mother, lavishing gifts on his childhood sweetheart turned wife and mother? Did his professions of love truly mean so little? Then her mind registered something that shot even greater pain through her heart. His love had always been brutal. For her mother, however, that brutality had been taken to the extreme, but it was she who was now suffering as a result. She dropped the bunny and stumbled the remainder of the way to the door, her legs giving way in despair as she leaned against the paneling. "Please," she croaked as loudly as able. "Please don't do this to me." She forced herself to go quiet and pressed her ear against the door. Perhaps her fear would be lessened if she knew what fate held in store. The voices were so close now she could just make out words being spoken, and her heart froze. If only she'd stayed in her room after the evening meal, then we would not be having this discussion. She recognized her father's voice, but to whom was he talking? One of the button men? Perhaps the same goon who carried her mother's body away? Oh, how she wished she had remained in her room and remained ignorant of what had happened. In the hallway outside the door, Arthur Barbara breathed heavily, relieved that the pleas of his daughter echoing faintly from behind the door had ceased. He could ill afford to heed her implorations, any more than he could have his wife's pleas. Sympathy he reserved for friends and family, not traitors and enemies. He shook his head at this mental suggestion that Maria was a traitor or his enemy. She wasn't, but she was something just as detrimental to his security, a witness. He kept his voice elevated and his gaze averted, as if being unable to see the door or hear her voice would help shut out the mental image of his daughter, crying and begging on the other side. He'd have already taken care of the unpleasantness had his son not intervened. Lorenzo Bartonelli glanced from the door to his father and fought against the urge to flinch. His father's gaze, ever cold and hard, seemed even more so now. As a child, that gaze had terrified him and still made him nervous on occasion, even though he was a man full grown and had never had a hand raised in discipline against him. He realized early on that being an only son and heir to his father's enterprises was advantageous, so he had no reason to fear his father's temperamental reprisals. Still, his father had never harmed his mother or sister either, that he was aware of, until now. Lorenzo closed his eyes briefly against an unwanted image, that of his own wife and newborn son. If his father had finally lost his grip on his mental well-being, could he lash out and harm them should he push this particular issue too far? He'd never been on the receiving end of his father's retribution, but that could change swiftly if he stood in the way of the reprisal of his sister. As much as he loved Maria, he loved his newborn son more, and he would never forgive himself if anything happened to his precious Rebecca and sole heir Dante, should Arthur ever suspect any of them of being disloyal. Lorenzo sighed heavily in his mind. How was he going to explain Maria's disappearance to Becca? They were such dear friends, even though nearly 10 years separated them in age. What was he to do? He couldn't tell Becca the truth without jeopardizing her life, but knew he needed to think of something in order to save Maria and simultaneously protect Becca and Dante. He felt a guilt weigh heavy in his heart, that he was hesitant to save his sister if it meant endangering his own loved ones. Compounding that guilt was the lack of tears over the loss of his mother. Why did the actions of his father against his mother and sister not faze him as thoughts of harm to his own family? Had what they'd done really been so heinous as to warrant the drastic measures being needed? Perhaps his mother's act had, but Maria? Lorenzo looked into his father's eyes again. Even though his gaze was austere, it was easy for him to see that his father was weary and unhappy over the latest turn of events. Did that tired sadness stem from love, or just lack of sleep? It was true that the greatly feared head of the Bartonelli family was growing old, and in this, the early hours of the morning, it showed. It had been a long night of unpleasantness. Now it appeared it would become an even longer day. Author had swept away one disastrous, disagreeable incident in the night, only to have another rear its ugly head. Only his sister Maria was not ugly. She was a beautiful disaster, but a disaster nonetheless in his father's eyes, and he feared that he would deal with Maria harshly, as his father tended to deal with all disasters that stood in his way. I understand, Father, that it isn't great for Maria to have seen what she did. Has the other been taken care of? Frank and Carlos came over early this morning and took care of things. They suggested it might be better for all involved if they made a return trip for Maria. Maria gasped when she heard her brother's voice. At least the muffled voice resembled her brother. So great was her astonishment that his words failed to register. All she felt was hope return. Her brother, always her protector, would never allow anyone or anything to harm her. "Lorenzo? Lorenzo! Please tell Daddy to let me out," Maria screeched. "I'll be good, I promise." "It's probably for the best they do," her father continued speaking, closing his eyes against the return of his daughter's entreaties. "We can't kill her, and well you know it." Lorenzo's voice rose in rivalry with his sister's implorations. He didn't want to hear her cries any more than his father did, for he didn't want to shoulder a heavier guilt should he fail to persuade father to change his mind. His mother was gone, and he didn't want to lose his sister too, but how to convince father to forego killing Maria also without becoming his enemy was the tricky part. No one questioned Author Bartonelli's decisions and lived to regret it. "If I can kill her mother, I can easily dispose of her." Arthur glared at his only son, but his anger was more self-directed. He felt the burden of his wife's death weighing him down, and the thought of having to dispose of his daughter also. It was almost more than he could bear. Almost. But he didn't remain in his position by being weak-minded and soft-hearted. "Really?" Lorenzo squared his shoulders and prepared to do battle, reason his only weapon. He took a deep breath, praying he would come out the victor, and not another victim. "Just exactly how are you going to explain yet another sudden death or disappearance to police? Huh, Dad? They're already eager to strap you into the electric chair for the crimes you committed. Problem is, they haven't been able to prove anything. Yet. But once they discover Mother is dead, which they will hound you and every member of this family until they can pin it on you. Tax evasion and your other numerous enterprises may not send you to prison for very long, but murder will. That FBI agent will be begging to turn the lock in the cell door, and he'll swallow the key. If he finds out that you're responsible for both of their deaths, he'll eagerly fry your ass." "Damn it all to hell," the elder man exclaimed, running short, beefy fingers through his graying hair. "Don't you think I know all of that? Why do you think I have to do something about your sister? Because the FBI will hound every member of the family, and Maria will be the one to break. We have to do something about her. She's the only witness to your mother's murder. If she were more like you, but she's not like you, is she, son? She's not loyal to me the way you are. If you'd have been here, you'd have helped me eliminate the threat your mother had become. Maria, well, she just screamed and ran. She ran, Lorenzo. She ran. Would have run straight out the front door and straight to the police. He shook his head and closed his eyes, breathing deep. She should have known she could never run. If only I could believe that she would never do me harm. She has her reasons for hating you, you know. I don't give a rat's ass what her reasons are. She should be loyal to the family no matter what the family does. I don't think it's what you've done to others that bothers her so much as what you did to her. She's your daughter, for God's sake. If you needed a diversion, oh, still gnawing on that bone, is she? Well, if she can't understand the rough patch I was going through with her mom during that time and accept my apology, then she's jingle-brained. I am not going to hang on to that mistake for the rest of my life, and neither should she. She certainly shouldn't have let it interfere with her loyalty. Loyalty is everything, but she's not loyalty. She's not loyal. And her mother wasn't loyal. I can't have disloyal people around me. So, Mr. Brilliant Mind, if we can't kill her, as you say, what do you think we should do with her? Keep her locked away in a room for the rest of her life? Because I can tell you right now, that's going to be the only way to keep her from ratting me out to the feds. If she hadn't seen you do it, then she might have bought the accident story we planned to give the fuss. But you got careless and let your emotion overrule your common sense. If you hadn't, we wouldn't be sitting here at 6 o'clock in the morning trying to decide what to do about your only daughter. Your only daughter. You get that, Dad, don't you? Yeah, I get it. And I get that her mother was my only wife. But that wife was threatening to drop a dime on me. I had to do something. If I hadn't, then Vinny would have. He probably would have strangled her right then and there if he was head of this family. Damn stupid broad. Now I'm facing the same situation with my only daughter. You think this is easy for me to deal with? You could have handled it better, Lorenzo snapped, and then shook his head in disbelief. Man, I can't believe that Mom bought that line from the FBI agent. Pegged her for a pushover for sure. It definitely was a sinker. And if Vinny hadn't showed up when he did, Sally would have ruined the entire family, had the key to my office in her hand when Vinny walked in. I still can't believe she was going to let that FBI guy go through your stuff like that. I can't believe she took that man's word as fact without checking with a member of the family first. We'd have just lied to her, like we've always done. Yeah, but she'd still be alive, ignorant and alive. Instead, she had to believe an outsider, was ready to allow that man into my private sanctum. Damn stupid broad. And now Maria... Maybe Maria will see the light, Dad, Lorenzo said in a last-ditch effort to change his dad's mind. He loved his baby sister, but at the same time, he could see what her testimony, if allowed, would do to their entire family. He could not let that happen any more than his dad could. After all, he had a family of his own to consider, and if his dad went down, he went down. Guilt by association never felt a heavy burden, as it did at this very moment. Have you ever attempted to talk to her? Or did you just chase her to her room and then lock her in as soon as she'd shut herself up in there? Maybe we should unlock the door and reason with her. Get her assurances that she won't rat you out. No, son. She's too much like her mother. Maybe it runs in their Catholic blood, I don't know. Pure as the driven snow and impeccable of deceit, both of them. Damn shame. Maybe you can marry her off to Uncle Salvador's son, Giovanni, back in Sicily. He's far enough away to make Maria unreachable. He'd make sure, too, that no one got to her. No, I can't send her anywhere that she might run off at the mouth. Yeah, Giovanni would do what he could to keep the cops away from her, but that doesn't mean she wouldn't seek out the cops when he turned his back one day. You're assuming a lot, Dad. Maria just may be scared enough at this point that she'll be willing to have her tongue cut out if it meant being able to get out of that room and resume her life as a member of the family. At that moment, Author's gaze changed. It took on a maniacal gleam that had Lorenzo worried that his dad would indeed consider cutting out his sister's tongue to keep her from talking to anyone ever again. "I hope you're not considering mangling your daughter to keep her silent," Lorenzo whispered worriedly. Arthur's gaze narrowed, and he spared Lorenzo with a look that made it clear what he thought about his son's comment, but he merely shook his head in response, then after a moment spoke again. "No, but I have decided that shipping her away, though, that's definitely worth considering. After all, if she goes away, then the FBI can't question her." "That's my point exactly. There is an FBI in Sicily, and even if they showed up, Uncle Salvatore and Giovanni would ensure she kept her mouth shut. Besides, you're assuming that FBI guy would even want to question Maria." "Oh, he'd want to," Arthur sighed. "They always go after the broads because they're the weakest, and Maria's the only weak broad left in this family. But if they find out we have family in Sicily, they'll find a way to get to her. That FBI agent will find Maria as sure as a hound on the trail of a rabbit, if we ship her off to family. So if I were to take your advice and not dispose of her, then the only option is to put her where the FBI wouldn't consider looking for her." "What do you have in mind, Dad?" Lorenzo's brow revealed his concern over his father's tone, which was far from reassuring. As far as he could detect in that tone, sending her away could mean taking her to New York to bury her instead of staying in Chicago. He may not want his sister to topple their family business, but he unquestionably did not want to see her dead like his mother. "What is it you have in mind, Dad?" he asked again, hoping God would hear his silent prayers and spare his baby sister. "We'll ship her away, just like you suggested. And I've just thought of a perfect place. After all, there's no better place for a nut than a nut house." Lorenzo winced, for he knew that Maria, being locked away in a sanatorium, was a fate worse than death. Thank you for listening to Edge of Insanity. If you are interested in finding out what happens to Maria in this book, again, it is available online at many online retailers, from my website at barbarawosterauthor.com, and from my friends at the Book Dragon in the United Kingdom. They are located at 6 West Row, Stockton-on-Tee, or from their website at thebookdragon.co.uk. Thank you again, and stay safe.